Hi, Westhampton Beach Middle School. Welcome to Thursday Night Live. Good evening, everybody. My name is Miss Williams. We'll wait for a little bit more people to come in. We have a really cool night with a lot of your teachers here and some great information that we want to share with you tonight. Miss Miller is actually on one of our virtual field trips, and she's going to explain someone really interesting who lived around here and is buried here. So she will be on soon. So we're just waiting a bit as people sign in.
'94 attendees so far.
Okay, welcome to Thursday Night Live. Our session this week is called Secrets of the Stones, Our Local History. Many of your social studies teachers are here tonight. A new face you might not recognize is also Mr. Williams. He's a social studies teacher at the high school. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Williams.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be able to promote my class in the high school, History of Long Island, that all you guys should take when you get to the high school in the future.
Yes, absolutely. So students, I see some of you are writing already on the chat, which is great. People are writing to their teachers. Haley Donahue, hey everybody, Nikki Lee. There are so many people that are writing. Miss Iliano is writing on the chat, Mr. Coleman. So this is awesome. Thanks so much. Please make sure you continue to write on the chat. I will try as hard as I can to keep you updated on what people are saying. And also we're going to put out some questions to you so that you can interact with us throughout our session. We are actually going to go on a couple of virtual field trips tonight around the area to learn our local history. And I'm really excited to share some of these stories with you, as are some of your teachers. So our first stop tonight is actually with Ms. Shamlafel, who is currently at the Westhampton Beach Cemetery. Mr. Shamlafel, are you there?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, we're at the lot tonight, and one of the first people when I moved out here and got my first teaching job at Westhampton in 1997, I heard a lot about Coach Hansen. A lot of the old timers always talked about Coach Hansen, and the original football coach at Westhampton. He started the program, and one of the interesting things that Westhampton fact about history, Westhampton football, is we were the smallest school in New York State to have football. So this is a big headstone. There are five tombstones here for the McFarland. If we come on over here, we have Coach Carl Hansen, and I think it's really cool that they put Coach on his tombstone. And if we scan over here, his wife was Alice McFarland, later on became Mrs. Hansen. And I had the pleasure of speaking to Coach Hansen's son today, who's actually 90 years old. He lives in Pennsylvania, and he missed my phone call the first time because he was out playing golf at 90 years old. They said he played 9 holes of golf today, and he's a really interesting gentleman, and he's really happy that we're doing this and keeping the memory of his father alive. So just a little background on Coach Hansen. He was born in East Orange, New Jersey. He attended Syracuse University. He played football and lacrosse there, which is kind of interesting because when he was at Syracuse in the 1920s, lacrosse was not as big as it was today. So he's played on one of the original teams at Syracuse. He got his first teaching job in New Jersey, and I found this is really interesting that his son told me that somehow his reputation as a coach reached out to Westhampton. Westhampton was trying to start their football program. So a representative from Westhampton went out to New Jersey, spoke to Coach Hansen, and recruited him to become the coach and start the program in Westhampton in 1929. And I thought that was really cool that he was brought out here to be the football coach and phys ed teacher. He was part of the Westhampton district for 31 years as a coach, a phys ed teacher, the athletic director, and finally the principal. And one of the cool things about Coach Hansen, he wasn't just a football coach. He was the basketball coach. He was the baseball coach. He was the wrestling coach. He was the coach of all the boys' sports at the time. And we saw his wife's grave, Alice McFarland. He married her in 1931. And he soon after bought his house on Schoolhouse Lane, which is right near the current Westhampton Beach Village Police Station. And his son told me that he bought that house on purpose so he could walk to school every day. His backyard was literally the backyard of the school. Not only is he considered the father of Westhampton football, he's also considered to be the father of Suffolk County sports. Suffolk County had been playing sports from the early 1900s, but it really wasn't organized. It wasn't the organized sports system that we have today. So he is the founding father that actually organized all the schools in Suffolk County to an organized, what we would call Section 11 today. There's a couple of awards that are named after him. In his honor, the top football player in Suffolk County is given the award each year. Westhampton Beach also gives out the Hansen Award to the student that with the athletic ability, the academics, and most importantly, a high character. That's going to be trivia questions that we're going to ask later on. So, you know, the Coach Hansen is a legendary figure in Westhampton Beach, and you know, a lot of the old timers talk about him. And we're going to take a trip down to Coach Hansen's original house on Schoolhouse Lane, and we're actually going to talk to the people who currently live there. And when we get there, I'm going to give you guys some fun facts about Coach Hansen. But before I switch off to the next person, I want to give 2 trivia questions.
Hey,
Our first.
Wait.
What's up?
Sorry, Mr. Shamaffel. I have a question here as well before you give out some of those questions also, maybe. Mr. Coleman is asking if there's any relation to Bob McFarland, the old science teacher in the middle school.
Absolutely, Mr. Coleman. Mr. McFarland is part of the McFarland family. And actually, when I reached out to Carl Hansen Jr., his son, the letter I sent was actually to the McFarlands. I believe Bob McFarland, and then Bob McFarland gave Carl Hansen Jr. The letter that I wrote.
Thank you. You have some questions for us. I know that people are waiting here to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, so I have 2 questions. My first question is, Westhampton Beach is the first school in Suffolk County history to get 3 consecutive Hansen Award winners. Who are those 3 consecutive Hansen Award winners? My second question, which is really a question and a great question, is like I mentioned before, Westhampton Beach High School gives out the Hansen Award. Academics, athletics, and most importantly, character. There are 3 current teachers in the Westhampton Beach School District that have received that award, 2 males and 1 female. So the 3 Hansen Award winners for football and the 3 Westhampton Beach High School current teachers that got the Hansen Award. And we'll check back into you at the end of the show and see if anything up with that answer.
We have some answers actually already. Elizabeth answered. One is Jaden Alfano St. John. Mrs. Montpetit wrote Dylan Lauby, Liam McIntyre, Jaden Alfano St. John, Liam, Dylan, Jaden by Aiden Collins. A lot of people are answering already, and they know who of our students have received the Hansen Award.
I think question number 2 might be a little bit of a challenge.
Yes, it is.
I agree.
It is a challenge to see if anybody knows some of those. Mr. Williams, do you have anything to add? You're such a of knowledge of our local history.
I do have a few things to add. You know, one thing that was mentioned about Mr. McFarland, Bob McFarland, the science teacher. Well, when you guys, the 7th and 8th graders, when you walk out of the front of the building, you can actually see the house he lived in because it's the Hume law offices that used to be a funeral home that McFarland ran, his father ran, and Bob McFarland would walk to school there. And you can see Bob McFarland because he was a big track runner for the Hurricanes back in the 60s. And then all the other things Mr. Sham said about Carl Hansen, I don't want to give away any trivia, so we'll hold off on those for later.
Yeah, we have some fun facts that are pretty interesting that I learned today that I'll share with you at the end.
And just so the participants know, we have a fun local history quiz at the end, not on what we're talking about now, but just in general that you're going to be able to answer in the chat. Let's see if anybody knows some of those answers. Thanks so much, Mr. Schaumwaffel. So we're actually going to move to Mr. Hempling now, who's in East Moriches. Mr. Hempling, where are you?
I am in East Moriches. I'm on Pequoddick Avenue. Before we get started, I just want to say to all the students out there, I miss you guys, and I hope to see you soon. And I hope everybody's staying healthy, and not only yourselves, but your families as well. I just want to turn the camera around a little bit here. I'm at the Colonel Josiah Smith Cemetery on Pequoddick Avenue in East Moriches. I wanted to actually start out with a question. Does anybody remember from history this year, history class, what a Minuteman was?
I'll tell you if there are answers coming
Jaden, that's disappointing, Jaden.
He responded pretty quickly.
He responded less than a minute.
Think about the name.
Oh, I think someone just got it. Someone.
And that would be there in a minute. Hold on, Kevin Smith to fight the British.
All right.
Maya Marino, a British soldier that got dressed up in a minute. Elizabeth, the people who fought in the American Revolution. Megan, the colonists who would be prepared to fight the British in the Revolutionary War. George, a person who would respond in a minute. Megan, in a minute or less. David, a home soldier that was ready for battle in under a minute. We have a lot of answers coming in.
Yeah.
All right. Good to hear. Good to hear.
Mostly right answers, which is
yes, that's right.
That's important. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little about Josiah Smith, but again, before I do, I just wanted to mention that when I was a middle schooler in East Moriches, before I attended Westhampton Beach High School, my legendary social studies teacher, Mr. Eugene Horton, used to take his students yearly for a walk down Montauk Highway from the school over here to the cemetery. And he would talk about Colonel Smith, and he would talk about the American Revolution. And so I wanted to do this as a way to honor my former teacher who passed away last year. He was a great guy and a major inspiration to me in becoming a teacher myself. So I wanted to just talk again about Josiah Smith. He was the grandson of a guy named Richard Smith. The town of Smithtown was named after him, and his family, many 2 generations earlier, had received a big land grant from King William and Queen Mary in 1697, and his family gave him a plot of land in East Moriches known as the East Moriches Patent, which was an agreement between the local Native Americans and the new English settlers. So in around the early 1770s, Long Island actually was a loyalist area. Again, the loyalists were people who were loyal to England at the time. Over time, however, especially after the Boston Tea Party, people started to change. Their attitudes started to change, and many people started to side against England. And Colonel Smith was actually given command of a local regiment of Minutemen here in this area of the east end of Long Island. So, pardon me, I just saw some text come across the screen. So Colonel Smith served at the Battle of Long Island, and a battle which the Continental Army actually lost. And at the time when the British captured the leaders and the militiamen, they either imprisoned them, and in some cases they hanged the leaders of those regiments. So he escaped and went to Connecticut for 3 years to avoid capture. 3 years later, he returns to East Moriches, and he's captured by the British. He spends a little bit of time in prison, and eventually he's set free at the end of the war. And Josiah Smith came back to East Moriches, and his family settled here on this plot. And I can't really go too far, but his house is actually on the next street. So I just wanted to also show you his headstone. Bear with me a moment. Okay, so there's his headstone that was put there by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1923. It replaced this old headstone that's just behind it, very similar to this. It's a little easier to see. The local community members actually, and this is a source of pride here in our town. Hello?
We hear
Hello?
you.
We can hear you.
Mr. Hempling, we could hear you. Your camera.
You can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. I lost my camera for some reason. I don't know how that happens. Let me see if I can reopen it up. Okay. I can't open it up, but you do hear me.
Yes.
So now the only people that are buried in the cemetery are descendants of Josiah Smith, and the last person who was buried here was buried in the early 1830s. I apologize for losing my screen. I'm looking for it still, but I will tell you that this has been a real pleasure, and I would like to turn it to the next person.
Thank you, Mr. Hempling.
Well,
You're welcome.
you know, if I could just add one thing that add on to something Mr. Hempling said, and for you guys who are listening, it's kind of a neat little story. And if you think about it, when you play Smithtown High School in sports, they're the Smithtown Bulls. You know, that's their logo, like we're the Hurricanes. And the reason they are, and the land that is now Smithtown was created because Colonel Smith, the way he was, they said, hey, we'll give you this land. We'll give you as much land as you can get if you ride on a bull for one day. So the perimeter of Smithtown is all the land that Colonel Smith covered in one day riding a bull. And that's why if you go to the center of Smithtown, there's a big bronze bull there, and their high school is the Smithtown Bulls. So just a little piece of information for you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
You're welcome.
Oh, I had no idea. Mr. Hempling, you're back. We can see you.
That might be good or bad, depending on who you are. Okay, so does anybody have any questions for me at this time?
Miss Eliano wrote that she was born in Smithtown. So cool, such interesting facts that I did not know. Any questions before we move on to our next trip? We're going now to Quogue, where Miss Weber is, who's actually going to speak about somebody who I taught about as a social studies teacher and who's really famous. And I taught about him when I started my Imperialism unit. So I had no idea he was buried there. So this is awesome. Miss Weber, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So here I am. I hope you can see it. It's kind of bright. I'm at the Quogue Cemetery on Lamb Avenue, at the gravesite of Alfred Thayer Mahan. I'm going to turn this way so you can see me. So 8th graders, you might remember his name from your Imperialism unit. But just to jog everyone's memory, the imperialist era began in the 1800s or the 19th century. Oh, I see some of my kids down there. Essentially, it's a time of American expansion. So we were looking to expand our territories and our economy all over the world and on our continent. So man was born around this time in 1840, which is actually 180 years ago, in West Point, New York. And his father was a professor at the U.S. Military Academy there. So Alfred went on to grow up and serve 40 years in the United States Navy. And he fought in the American Civil War and the Spanish-American War. He was a high-ranking official in the Navy throughout his career, and he served in critical battles in both of those wars. But he's actually best known for a book that he wrote, and I'll get to that in a little bit, because he championed sea power, so basically our Navy, and gave the United States a roadmap of not only how to expand its territory, so how to grow during this time, but also establish markets and engage in commerce around the world. So how, to sell our goods all around the world, not just within our own country. So throughout man's lifetime, America was looking to grow, like I was saying. And I'll pose my first trivia question here that you can answer in the comments. What is the name of the doctrine that began in 1823 and essentially put a stop to European colonization of the Americas? Oh, Zoe.
Monroe Doctrine.
Good job.
We have a lot of people who knew it immediately.
Wow, impressive.
So smart.
Yeah.
So at that
A lot
time,
of Monroe Doctrines coming in.
excellent. Oh, you guys rock. So at that time, the Spanish and Portuguese colonies were beginning to gain independence from the Spanish and Portuguese empires, and the U.S. wanted to be able to exert its power undisturbed. We wanted to kind of own our own land, be the power on this continent and in the Americas. So we didn't want Europe colonizing any more of this territory. So the United States grew wildly over this time, the course of the 19th century. And I have another trivia question here. What were the last 2 states to join the Union? And then I have a stretch question in case we have some history buffs. What member of Abraham Lincoln's cabinet negotiated the purchase of Alaska?
Okay, so we have Reef, Sophia, Maya, Grace, George, all writing Hawaii and Alaska as our last 2 states. I haven't seen the answer to
Yeah, that was a tough
hard one.
So the hint I'll give you, and then I'll keep talking. So the member of the cabinet who, negotiated the purchase, many people considered this purchase a folly. Maybe that rings a bell. But anyway, by the end of the
We got one.
George.
Ah, nice. Well done.
Wow.
George, good job.
By the end of the 1800s, the United States actually suffered an economic depression. It wasn't the Great Depression, but it was a depression. And it was clear that we were producing more goods than we could sell within our nation. So the supply was more than the demand. And so comes in this guy right here. In his book, The Influence of Sea Power Among History, he argued that a strong presence in the sea is one of the greatest advantages that a country can have. And it'll lead to victory in war and also help them become a super influential world power. So he was a really big champion of the Navy and being in control of the sea. And he specifically pointed to Great Britain's imperial power because they were dominant in their military, their political system, their economy. And he argued that they were so successful in colonizing all these places because of their Navy, because their Navy was so strong. So he ultimately argued that we needed to do the same thing. And he had 3 main points that he argued. He said, first, we need a merchant Navy to carry American products to the new markets across the pond and all over the world. So he said we need to sell our goods all around the world, not our country. He said that we need an American battleship navy to deter or destroy rival fleets. And third, that we need a network of naval bases capable of providing fuel and supplies for the Navy and kind of keeping the lines of communication open. So we want to be able to talk to the places that we're selling our goods. So important people of the time, such as, he was then the secretary or the assistant secretary of the Navy, but then became president, Teddy Roosevelt, listened to what Alfred had to say and all his points in his book. And our nation ultimately carried out all 3 points that he made. And his championing of our naval forces and his ideas about establishing markets all around the world played a critical role in American imperialism and our nation basically becoming what it is today. So that's Alfred.
Thank you so much, Ms.
All right.
Weber. Hi, Mr. Williams.
Hi, I actually have, surprisingly, I have something to add to Alfred Mahan.
Great.
So being a Navy guy, he, from the time he died until, and currently today, there are 12 ships in the Navy, not all at the same time, but over the course of 100 plus years, 12 different ships have been named the USS Mahan after him. And when we got to talking the other day about this, about what we were doing, and it jogged my memory. So one of the sister ships, because I was in the Navy myself, and one of the sister ships when I was in Desert Storm that served alongside of us was the USS Mahan, DDG-42. And I was like, wait a minute, I didn't know that guy was buried here. So the things I learned too.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Great job. Thanks so much. So we got Mr. Tuttle over in Remsenburg right now as well, who wants to speak to us. Mr. Tuttle, I think you're on Remsen Lane, if I'm correct. Are you there?
That is correct. I am live from Remsenburg down a quiet side street and here to tell the story of this little private cemetery here. This is a very much lesser known person. We're going to be talking about James Tuttle, and he's actually a relative of mine. And so to figure out how James Tuttle even got here in the first place, we have to tell just a quick story about Remsenburg. In the 1700s, this land where I'm standing now was where families from Southampton would bring their cattle to graze. And this was great open meadows. And by about 1800, some of those same families from Southampton ended up moving and settling here permanently. And we have remnants of these families. We have both relatives that are still alive today, but there's also a number of streets in Remsenburg that are named after these families. So I want you to go ahead, type in your guesses. What are some families that have streets named after them in Remsenburg? So I'll get to some of those answers in just a minute. One of the families here, the Tuttle family, has its own private cemetery. So in 1800, when the Tuttle family settled here, there were no big cemeteries to be buried in. So the Tuttle family made their own small cemetery where family members, when they passed away, would be buried. And so James Tuttle, his little green marker there says that he died in 1826. It has an American flag because he served in our nation's military actually during the Revolutionary War. And he has a really, really cool story because James Tuttle is kind of split. He was a little bit of a loyalist and a little bit of a patriot. And we'll get to that story now. But the backstory is during the Revolutionary War, Long Island became one of the first battles, and the colonists lost the Battle of Long Island, which meant that all of Long Island was under British military occupation. And not too far from here in Southampton, there were over 4,000 British troops that were stationed at the height of the war. So there was an immense amount of pressure from the British military to stay loyal to the king, but there was also a growing resentment on the east end of Long Island to rebel from the king. So James Tuttle is a little bit clever. We don't know exactly why, but he signed an oath of allegiance to the King of Britain. So one of the local officials in the area brought a piece of paper, and James Tuttle signed it that he's going to stay loyal to the King of Britain. But then, interestingly enough, he actually also served in the Suffolk County militia alongside the other rebel patriots. So I don't know exactly why he did both, but that's what he chose to do, probably to stay out of trouble with the British soldiers that may have pressured him and maybe would have treated him unfairly, but also to fight for the cause he believed in. But some of the other families that lived in this area during the time included the Remsen family, whose lane I'm standing on now, but the Halseys, the Phillips, the Rayners, the Rogers family. These are some families that we still have Halseys and Rogers and Tuttles and Phillips walking around the streets today. So it's a pretty cool local history here.
So I don't know if you saw the chat, Mr. Tuttle, but everybody has written all of the families that you just said.
That's awesome.
And
hopefully they got the Tuttle one. You got to make the Tuttles proud.
Yes, Tuttles are there.
Fantastic.
In the beginning, there's a lot of Tuttles. Yes. Also, Mr. Shamlaffel, I don't know if you saw what he wrote. He wrote, "My family were loyalists and moved to Canada during the Revolutionary War." Is that true, Sham? Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. They were farmers in upstate New York, and they were loyal to the king, and they moved to Ontario, Canada.
Wow.
Some of the other Tuttles from this area actually moved to Connecticut and Vermont because there was so much pressure from them to stay loyal. So they figured, let's move to a place that's a little bit less under British occupation, a place where we're out of the spotlight. So others, though, like James, decided to kind of trick the system, I guess.
Thank you.
I have one more place to move to, so
Okay.
Well, Mr. Tuttle, could you just, Mr. Tuttle, could you just show the house behind you for a second? So that is one of the original homes on Remsen Lane, and it's still occupied by descendants of Remsen, and they're actually the Ridgeleys. And Mr. Tuttle and Miss Weber, you know their descendants, James and Will. But when those guys were really little, they would come out here, but they would leave for the week, and I would have to stay in that house and watch their dogs all by myself. And that cemetery was the spookiest thing to ever have to sleep by, I can tell you that. So just a little tidbit that I had for that house.
So thank you, Mr. Tuttle. We are going to actually move to Mr. Miller now, who's in Westhampton. So before we do that, I'm going to show you a clip of the famous person that's buried that Mr. Miller is by, just to show you who it is. So let me share this with you so you can watch.
And that's they aim to do. Hello again, everyone. I'm Howard Cosell. Glad to have you aboard for NFL Monday Night Football here on ABC. We look forward to this game. As cold as it is, my colleagues are not as suitably garbed as I am. They are younger. Quickly, because both coaches come from the college ranks, let's take a look at them.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm here at the gravestone of Howard Cosell. Now, he could go all the way is a phrase that many of you know from ESPN's Chris Berman. But did you know that it was Howard Cosell who first coined the phrase that Chris Berman has now made famous for all of us? So Howard Cosell, he was and still is one of the most popular broadcasters ever. He was actually born in North Carolina, and he was raised in Brooklyn, New York. Believe it or not, he was born Howard Cohen, but he changed his name to Cosell to honor his grandfather. When his grandfather came to America, immigration had spelt the name wrong, and they had written it down as Cosell, as Cohen. So to honor his grandfather, he changed his name back to Cosell. I'm going to show you the gravestone here. There we go. All right. Now, Howard Cosell began his career as a lawyer in 1941. And believe it or not, he counted Willie Mays as one of his clients. By the end of that year, 1941, he entered World War II as an officer in the U.S. Army. Now, in 1953, Howard Cosell began hosting a Little League radio show. Now, he did this without pay, and he did it for about 3 years. And he loved it so much that he decided to leave law and become a full-time broadcaster. He rose to broadcasting fame when he started to cover boxer Cassius Clay in the early 1960s. Now, Howard Cosell was one of the first people that referred to Cassius Clay as Muhammad Ali. One of his most famous calls, Howard Cosell's that is, that took place in 1973, it involved the boxing match between Joe Frazier and George Foreman for the World Heavyweight Championship. Now, when Foreman knocked down Frazier on the mat for the first of 6 times, Howard Cosell was called. 2 minutes into the first round, Howard Cosell yelled out, "Down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier." And Ms. Williams is going to show you that clip as well.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to share it with you. So this is what he said.
Saying it, you may hear him. Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! The heavyweight champion is taking the mandatory 8 count, and Foreman is as poised as can be in a neutral corner. He is.
Now, today's day and age, we have all the latest technology in our hands. When something happens, everybody's phone pings. We can go online. We could see the news. But years ago, back when Howard Cosell was a broadcaster, people had to either wait for the morning newspaper to find out what happened, tune into late night news to see what was going on, or sometimes during major sporting events, people like Howard Cosell would tell the world what was happening. So Howard Cosell was also known as somebody who spoke to the world and told them all of the major or the big events that were going on. Some of the big events that he had to tell: in 1977, the New York Yankees, and here's the first trivia question, were playing in the World Series. So who were the Yankees playing in that 1977 World Series? So 1977 World Series, the Yankees were playing. Howard Cosell termed the phrase, "The Bronx is burning." The Bronx is burning. Now, this is because in the Bronx during that time, a lot of apartments were going up in flames. There were a lot of apartment fires at the times. And during the World Series, the cameras of the World Series cameras kept shooting pictures over at the Bronx, and they saw the fires that were going throughout the Bronx. So in 1977, "the Bronx was burning" was a phrase that he coined during the live telecast of the 1977 World Series. So I see some answers popping up on the chat below.
Yes.
Yes, and the correct answers were the Dodgers. So those who said the Dodgers are correct.
Lewis,
So
Kyler.
So the second part of that for some of you, where were the Dodgers from when they were playing the Yankees in 1977 World Series? Where did the Dodgers play at that time? It's kind of a trick question.
Everyone's writing LA, Los Angeles.
Los Angeles is the correct answer. Yes, Los Angeles. Now, another important event that Howard Cosell had told the world about was also the death of John Lennon. So Miss Williams has the clip of that. And that happened on Monday Night Football, where Howard Cosell, in the booth, it was towards the end of the game of Monday Night Football, he was charged with telling the world that John Lennon had passed away in New York City.
Just going to share my screen so people can see it.
You have got to say what we know in the book. This is just football. Four losers. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that.
Thanks, Mr. Miller. I had no idea that he was buried here.
Yes. So here in Westhampton, am I still there? I think
Yes.
I'm frozen up a little bit. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So here in Westhampton, we have one of the great all-time sports broadcasters that helped shape the sports landscape as we know it. He was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame in 1994, and in 1995 was a recipient of the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. So why is Howard Cosell buried here? Maybe you guys can help me research this a little bit more. I did find out that his wife's last name was Abrams. So there are many Abrams that have lived in the area and settled in the area. Someone had told me that he had a house on Dune Road where they used to come and vacation. But he was born in North Carolina. He was raised in Brooklyn. He lived in Westchester. I read that he did vacation here a little bit, but as to why he was buried here in Westhampton Cemetery, I'm still, quite honestly, a little fuzzy on that. I'm still, maybe somebody out there knows. Maybe somebody could type an answer in on the bottom there.
George wrote that he lived on Dune Road.
I did. Yes, I heard. I did read he had a summer home on Dune Road, so that could be why.
Mr. Williams.
He did have that house on Dune Road, because if you were in your 50s or 60s and you remember walking by Rogers Beach, you would see him sitting out at the beach a lot on Dune Road. But one of the guys he used to love to talk about on Monday Night Football, because Howard Cosell had a house here in Westhampton, was he loved to talk about Sean Farrell when he played in the pros, because Sean Farrell, as Mr. Sham probably could talk about, is one of our most famous Hurricane football players whose number is retired in the high school gym. But he used to love to talk about Sean Farrell on Monday Night Football because they were both from, had connections to Westhampton.
So I don't know, everybody, Mrs. Lagatola, one of our language teachers at the high school, wrote that she had the pleasure of meeting him and he would often frequent the Quag Beach Club. So.
Very cool.
And another, Anderson Hip, wrote, my mom is friends with his granddaughter, met in the summer when she was visiting on Dune Road. So interesting connections that other people have as well. Thank you, Mr. Miller. We're gonna move
Thank you.
We're gonna move over to Mrs. Miller. Are you there?
Hey everyone, I sure do miss you. Thanks, Miss Williams. I'm here. I'm actually Brookside in Westhampton Beach Cemetery, and the gentleman that I'm going to be speaking about, he prided himself, and maybe Mr. Williams can answer the question for us after I'm done speaking. He said he was so proud. He said he was so proud to live on the Brookside of Westhampton Beach. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this special person, and then maybe Mr. Williams can help us out later on. And I have my daughter here helping me, so I'm just going to flip my camera around. And here we go. So, and again, before I start, thank you to our social studies department and Mr. Williams and Miss Williams. You're doing it, Miss Williams doing a great job emceeing tonight. It's so cool to hear about all of our local legends. The Westhampton Cemetery is full of remarkable people and outstanding individuals. Tonight, they get the honor to highlight one of the distinguished men and many of his accomplishments. This is Mr. Bud Shelberg's tombstone. He was born Seymour Wilson Shelberg on March 27, 1914. His father was the chief of production at Paramount Studios. Bud Shelberg attended Dartmouth and spent World War II making information and propaganda films for the War Department and the CIA. Mr. Shelberg was an interesting man who worked in Hollywood during the Golden Age. He worked alongside greats like Audrey Hepburn and Andy Griffith, Walter Matthau, Marlon Brando, and F. Scott Fitzgerald. Mr. Shelberg was an American screenwriter, television producer, novelist, and sports writer. He served in the Navy and wrote pieces that exposed that were unspoken about truths and events. Just like Howard Cosell, Mr. Shelberg was well known for using his words to influence people. In 1954, he made the famous movie On the Waterfront. The story was about crime, the mob, and boxing. This type of movie captured audience members' attention as it was all new topics to the big screen and quite different than the silent movies. In 1955, Mr. Shelberg won an Academy Award. He won an Oscar for Best Story in Screenplay for On the Waterfront. He also won the Writers Guild of America that year for his writing on the waterfront. Additionally, he won an Academy Award for A Face in the Crown. And Mr. Shelberg also won the Laurel Award for Screenwriting Achievement in 2008. This award is a lifetime achievement award given by the Writers Guild of America to a person that has advanced literature of the motion picture through the years and who has made outstanding contributions to the profession of the screenwriter. Our very own Hollywood legend rests right here in our community. Mr. Shelberg wrote journalism, short stories, and novels. He even collaborated with Spike Lee on a screenplay about the heavyweight title fights between Joe Louis, the Black American champion, and Max Schmeling, the German boxer, each man serving as a reluctant symbol for two nations soon to go to war. How cool is Mr. Shelberg? He wrote over decades. He wrote about wars. He connected Hollywood, sports, and politics, providing Americans with stories that made them think differently. He entertained Americans during great times and difficult times. Kids, do you know that Mr. Shelberg contributed to the original script of a movie that was remade in 2018 starring Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper? Maybe Miss Williams can give you a hint and play a soundtrack. So this way, and can you write in your guesses of what movie that Mr. Shelberg was a writer for?
Tell me something, girl.
Any guesses, Miss?
Oh, we have a lot of
Any guesses, Miss Williams?
Yes, we have so many. I can't even go back.
I even wore a sweater with a hint on it.
Aiden, Abby, Val.
Well, awesome job, everybody.
George, all guessed it. Ella, Maya, Gavin, Shannon, Maya, Anderson, Megan, Zoe, Celeste, Sophia, Kylie, Rob,
Yay!
and a list goes on and on. Everybody knew.
All right, good. A Star is Born. Well, Mr. Shelberg said in 2006, and I think it's important we listen to his last few words, I'd like to be remembered as someone who used their ability as a novelist or as a dramatist to say the things he felt needed to be said about the society while being as entertaining as possible. He said, because if you don't entertain, nobody's going to listen. Thank you, Mr. Schellberg, for your influence and contributions. We are honored you picked our community to be your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Williams, anything to add before we move on?
No, I was just waiting for Mrs. Miller to give me that question because I might be a little stumped on it, but that's okay. We'll wait. That's all I had. Even though I thought Mr. and Mrs. Miller were going to sing that duet for us instead of having a video of it.
We're on opposite sides of the cemetery, but you know what it does say, Mr. Williams, on the bottom of Mr. Schellberg's tombstone with his wife and his son, it does say "At Peace by Brookside." So he definitely meant something to him, and he said words are powerful. So we have a good homework assignment for ourselves.
All right.
See you all in a few. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going back to Mr. Shamwaffle, who I think is in a really special place right now. Mr. Sham, are you there?
What? Yes, I'm at the original Hansen house with, you go around, with Elizabeth and Gerard, who are the current owners.
Hi. Wow. Hello.
Part of this.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so they invited us inside. They made us cookies. I'm with Jolie, Lorette, and Samantha here. So I brought them a little bit of a gift. This is Westhampton Beach's first football team, and Coach Hansen is right there. So I'm giving them as a little bit of memento. And my only prerequisite is they have to display it in the Hansen house, and they were really thrilled to be a part of that. And I'm also going to give them a little old. This is actually from Mrs. Met, her great grandfather. This is a copy of her great grandfather's certificate for playing football, and it's actually got Coach Hansen's signature at the bottom. So here's for you guys. Thank you. So
I need to find a place.
I have a quick question. When I was visiting earlier, you mentioned one of the traditions that Mrs. Hansen would do. So what is one of the traditions that you carry on?
Well, hence the cookies. So when we moved in, it was like shortly after 9/11, we came here, and our neighbors in the back, the Garvins, who've been here forever, she didn't know Carl, but she knew Carl Jr. very well, and she wanted me to ask about if he has Parkinson's, and I said, "Oh, he just got off the golf course."
Yeah,
so
for what I'm saying, he's perfectly healthy, 90 years old.
We met him once. Yeah, so he came to look and everything.
He was delighted that the kitchen hasn't changed very much.
Yeah, and his bedroom. But anyway, so when we moved in, the Garvins, she came over with a cake, and she said, "This is the tradition of Alice Hansen, that anybody who moved into the neighborhood, she would bring over a cake." And I said, "Oh my gosh, so we had the cake." So then I tried to do that with other neighbors, and now we have.
But the neighborhood has changed quite a bit since it went.
Yeah,
it was purchased in 1999.
Okay.
Purchased it in 1999, and the neighbor next door. What did I want to say about that? The neighbor next door. Yeah, Paul Marino told me something about. The architecture is called a four square. I'm sure you know that.
Okay.
It's a very square home, and it has two porch. One porch in the front, that's an addition.
Okay.
But I think the original base. And there are trees that are kind of a part of holding
the
beams,
foundations. Yeah.
So it's a nice basement. It's not a finished basement, but it's kind of a dry. It's very safe.
Yeah, there's trees.
It's good bones.
Were you guys with the significance of the house when you bought it?
No. The realtor. I mean, there was probably something being said at the time. I was, my life was complicated, so I purchased the house a little bit by default, frankly, and I fell in love with it and all that stuff, all the rest.
Yeah, it's a great house, and as I can tell you, it pretty much is the same house as the Coach Hansen family lived in, and I love that part of the house. I have one more little fun fact about Mrs. Hansen, and this is a great little fun fact. Mrs. Hansen came up with the first school fight song, Cheer for Westhampton High, at the tune of Anchors Away. It's just a story, and and we're really privileged to be here. Carl Hansen actually told me. So we're actually really happy to be here. I do have two quick little stories I'd like to say. Maybe Mr. Hempfling and Mr. Williams can chime in on two stories they have for Mrs. Hansen. and we'll end it up on that.
Okay. Wait,
So sure.
Because that's what spoke to me after we spoke about the cake, and I knew you guys were coming over. Thought of making cookies.
Great.
And that was
We
inspired
appreciate
by
it.
Alice. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What the hell this is?
So, Mr. Hempling, why don't you go? You want to go first, Mr. Hempling?
You have to come and sit here.
You know, let me go. I'll go first while Mr. Hempling's getting set. Mr. Sham.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What, Mr. Williams?
Oh, okay, I'll go first while Mr. Hempling's getting set. So for the new tenants of the Hansen house, I lived where the Marinos live. Now that's the first house on 12 South on South Road. Right. So we
at the corner house.
Yeah, on the corner house of School and South Road.
Right.
The gray house.
For the Marinos.
Yes, correct. My parents sold it to them.
95. Is it 95?
95 was when my parents moved out of there. Correct.
Right.
So they
And
was
we did very good friends. They are in South Carolina now, and they own the cottage next door.
Correct. Right. Exactly. So when I used to walk to school from that house to the high school, I used to pass. Mrs. Hansen would always be on that front porch behind you.
Oh, how interesting.
Right. So I would always see her, you know, when my brother, and I had a twin brother, and we would always wave to her. You know, and my father was the coach at Westhampton in the 60s, so she knew Mrs. Hansen, you know, the whole time. So Mrs. Hansen, like in January or so, said, well, where are you going to college? So we had said I was going to the University of Delaware. My brother was going to University of Maryland. So she asked us that, like again, around March or so. And then in June, right before we graduated, Mrs. Hansen called us over as we were, you know, walking back or to school. And she said, I have a present for you guys. And she gave us each this box. And in my box was Mrs. Hansen had knitted this sweater, and mine was blue and gold because that was the colors of the University of Delaware. And my brother's was red and white because that was the colors of the University of Maryland. So, you know, that was Mrs. And it's funny because I always tell that story in school because it's really like Industrial Revolution. It's quality, like this quality sweater that she had worked on that I still have 35 years later. And, you know, versus quantity of the Industrial Revolution, you know, where these sweaters just, you know. So it's just a great story. So I walked past that house, you know, all the time growing up because it was on my way to school because I lived right next door to you guys.
How nice. Well, it's a delight. We are very happy in the house.
Thank you so much.
We're very lucky.
We love that porch, but I can picture her sitting there. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Hey, and just to finish up our trivia question, Ms. Williams, did we have anybody that came up with answers to our Westhampton High School Award winners?
I don't know. So let's put it out there. Anyone know any Hansen Award winners that are part of our teachers now?
2 male teachers and 1 female teacher.
Any guesses?
Good hint.
Up, Shannon T, Corey Williams.
Corey
Williams.
I got it right here. And the crazy thing was, I actually got this from Mrs. Hansen, awarded it to me at the awards night.
Oh,
that's great.
She was still alive at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So cool.
So that's one. So there's 2 more people out there.
All right, so we have other guesses. Megan, Mr. Orr.
Mr. Orr is 2. Mr. Orr was a great athlete.
Mr. Orr was. Great work. Mr. Monpetit is guessed by Zoe. Reef guessed Mr. Shamwaffle.
No.
Bella guessed Mr. Monpetit. Maya guessed Mr. Hempling. Shannon guessed Miss Met. Elizabeth. Miss Peters.
Miss Peters. Miss Katie Fabian, as I remember when she was in high school. She's now Katie Peters. She is the 3rd, and as the winner.
Good job.
So we're really thankful to let us in, and it was a great little stop.
Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Making it more valuable to our heart.
Yes.
Thanks, Williams.
Thank you.
See you all.
Okay, our last trip tonight, before we play a game that all of you can take part in on the chat, that's going to go fast, so you're going to have to be with us, is with Mr. Tuttle again. Mr. Tuttle, are you there?
I am still in Remsenburg. I bike just down the street. I'm behind the Remsenburg Chapel, and I'm here with another author, as we can see by the book on top of the tombstone. So this is a very interesting person. He lived a pretty crazy life. There's not many people that have a Sir in front of their name, so we'll get to why he has a Sir in front of his name. He was also captured by the Nazi military and taken as a prisoner. And lastly, he added over 25 words to our dictionary. And this person is P.G. Wodehouse. He's an author. He was a novelist who wrote over 70 books, and he wrote over 200 short stories, many of them for the Saturday Evening Post, which was a very widely read newspaper in the United States. But P.G. Wodehouse, to get to his story, well, our trivia question is, what country was he from where he could be knighted? So P.G. Wodehouse was given honorary knighthood status,
Elizabeth.
which explains why he's got his name Sir Pelham Grenville Wodehouse. So we got the answer.
Yes, we have a lot of guesses. George, Bella, Robbie, Chris, Kyler, all England, Great Britain, Marina, Bryce, Keith, Julia, Robert, Dominic, all out. Oh, wait, we got a Scotland in there as well.
Fantastic. So yes, he was born in Britain, which explains why he could receive knighthood status. But a little bit later on into his career, he made a pretty odd decision. Right at the beginning of World War II, he decided to move to France to continue writing from France. Well, little did he know, but the Nazi army was actually invading France when he moved. And eventually they invaded the town where he was staying. And he was literally out on the back patio while the Nazi party army was marching through, and they took him as a prisoner and brought him back to Berlin. And he was kind of like a celebrated prisoner to take. He was like a little bit of a celebrity, and so he was held in very high regard as a prisoner of the Nazi party. But for some reason, we're not exactly sure why, but he starts as a prisoner of the Nazi party. He starts doing radio broadcasts for the Nazi party that are aired in the United States. And he gives kind of his comic take on what it is to be a prisoner of the Nazis. Well, that didn't sit very well with Britain. And when the war was over, even though he was a prisoner doing these radio broadcasts, he was not allowed back in Britain, and France actually kicked him out of the country too. And so that explains why he ended up here in the United States. Now, later on in his life, the Queen of Britain decided to give him honorary knighthood status because it kind of came to light that he had a lapse in judgment. He was really pressured by the Nazi party to be a propaganda spokesperson for them, but they gave him knighthood status. But lastly are some of the words that live on in our dictionary because of all the writings of P.G. Wodehouse. One of the words is at the top. The word is Jeeves. And Jeeves is a word for like a reliable servant or a reliable butler. And it's kind of the inspiration behind CP3O in Star Wars, who is a reliable sidekick. Some other words are zing, and some phrases like 50-50, and even the departing saying of Toodaloo. Those are all credited to P.G. Wodehouse, who is buried here in Remsenburg. So pretty cool stuff from an author that we might not know very well.
Yes, Mr. Miller brought up that like one of the first search engines we had on the internet was called Ask Jeeves when you had a question.
Yes, that's very true. Ask Jeeves was one of the first. Now we use Google. Jeeves didn't win out.
Yes. So before we leave, and Mr. Williams, you have anything to add? This is so interesting, Mr. Tuttle. Thank you.
No, everything I know about the man, I've just learned from Mr. Tuttle.
It's great. So thank you so much to all the social studies teachers. We have a really fun quiz to play with you. But before we do that in the chat, which everybody can interact with, we're going to go just really quickly to the Westhampton Beach Cemetery with Miss Miller again. And from the middle school, with love from us, we are going to place flags for Memorial Day at the World War I, World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam War memorials that are there to commemorate all of the people that served from around this area. Miss Miller.
Hi, Miss Williams. Hi, everyone again. And I just wanted to say thank you all for tuning in. And it's real important. We've got all this great local history. So it's important that we remember those that are with us every day and those that aren't. So I'm going to flip my camera around so you can see, but we left flags here on the War Memorial that Mr. Williams will speak about. And if you get a chance, students, and you ride your bike, obviously not together because we're social distancing, but separately, during the next couple of weeks before Memorial Day weekend, you should come over and pay tribute and honor to all of our World War I, World War II, and Korean War veterans. We have many, many community members that fought for all of our independence and peace and the great of our country. And Mr. Tuttle, we see your family is actually here on a statue that was erected in August 1st of 1866, and it says Sergeant Cyrus B. Tuttle. So thank you all for coming out tonight. And before we leave, I know we have some questions, so don't leave, guys. I know the Long Island history students are going to be on with Mr. Williams, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, and it's really been a remarkable evening, and one that I think we all really need a little bit of way to get to connect with one another and enjoy one another. And I hope you enjoyed tonight just as much as I did. Back to our Long Island history segment.
So Miss Miller, just to add to you, George wrote that his grandparents are there and are veterans as well. So I'm sure a lot of people have relatives that are there. So let's, thank you for sharing that, George. Let's play a game with everybody. We actually have a special guest here. His name is Connor Farnan, and he is a high school 10th grader at Westhampton High School, and he took Mr. Williams's Long Island history class. So he is actually going to ask you some questions that are not questions about what we talked about here, but questions about Long Island history to see if anyone knows the answers. If you do know the answers, write it in the chat, and I will tell Connor what people are saying. Hi, Connor. Thanks for being with us.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Do you have a question for everybody?
I gotta think for a second. Oh, I have a solid one. So at Montauk, there's this big kind of building that I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen. I know there's a field trip there. I'm not sure what grade. Do you know what grade that kids go to Montauk, Ms. Williams?
I believe it's, I'm sorry, what did you guys say?
Oh, so people are writing eighth grade.
Eighth. Okay, so for some of my 8th graders in here, you may know this. That trip to Montauk, there's a huge building with some, it looks like big satellites on top. Does anybody know what that building was used for back in the day?
Good question. Does anyone know what, so Kayla wrote a radio building. Shane wrote a lighthouse. Riley, an Air Force station.
I'm seeing some right. I'm seeing some correct.
You are?
Yep. It was a fort called Fort Hero, and it was pretty much used to. It's really a mystery. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about it. So some people believe it was used to mutate different animals and stuff, and it was just kind of like an Area 51 type place. Nobody really knows what went on there.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Great question. Thanks, Connor. Mr. Williams, I know you have probably some questions as well.
You know, one of the assignments Connor just finished, Connor, maybe you want to ask a question about the president from Long Island?
Oh, FDR. So let me think. Does anybody know, if you saw FDR, there would be one thing that really struck out to you about him? Something that was different than a lot of other people, but not necessarily super uncommon. Does anybody know what that was?
Shannon. He was
Shannon.
Polio.
He had polio.
He had polio, so he was in a wheelchair and
It's long.
not able to walk for the majority of his life, or for the majority of the end of his life.
A lot of people are writing that. Aiden, Jamie, Chris, Julia are all right. Isabella, polio.
Mm-hmm.
He was paralyzed waist down.
Yes.
Connor.
Good question.
Connor, maybe you could ask the kids, because I'm sure they almost all of them go to the beach, about that first big assignment we did about rebuilding. Maybe you have a question or two you could ask them about Dune Road.
Hmm.
And from that
Does
assignment.
anybody know does anybody know the reasons that the jetties were implemented into Westhampton?
Ooh, hard question.
And then if that gets answered pretty quickly, what that caused for Westhampton?
Let's see.
Oh, there
Okay,
you go.
and stop erosion. Maya of erosion, George erosion, to protect the dunes eroding, prevent erosion. We have a lot. So the water doesn't get on the road.
So it was for erosion. And then does anybody know what ended up happening when a hurricane came? And
Jamie wrote it caused the hurricane.
didn't necessarily cause the hurricane, but
I wrote it washed away, caused a washout, wiped out Westhampton dunes.
Yeah, so what happened is the hurricane, what the jetties did was it didn't let sand get past it. So at the final jetty that was placed, the project wasn't completely finished, so the jetties didn't go all the way down. So what happened was there was no sand being deposited on the other side of the jetty. And then all the water flowing in there caused an inlet, which eventually got smaller. And then when it was kind of small, or there was a big one and a small one, and we dealt with the big one, but the small one, they were like, it'll close up. And then it did not close up, and it became, Mr. Williams would probably know better than me, but I think a mile long. Like the beginning, you could take a rock and just chuck it across, and then it was just absolutely massive and wreaked havoc on Dune Road.
Right where Pikes Beach is now.
Wow. Want to do one last question, Mr. Williams?
One last question. All right. I think, Connor, you want to ask him a question? We spent a lot of time talking about, and it backs up what Mr. Hempling talked about with the Revolutionary War. And Connor, maybe you have a question about the Battle of Long Island, or who were the generals and things at the battles?
Yeah, that's a great question. Does anybody know the names of any of the generals at the Battle of Long Island?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
That is a hard one.
Oh, not so hard for John Nizzi, though.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're all,
Maybe not so hard.
I guess not.
George Washington. Connor wrote William Howe. Kylie Washington. A lot of George Washingtons.
And they are correct.
Wow.
Great job. Great job, everybody.
Yeah. Well, Connor, thank you so much for helping us out tonight.
No problem. Happy to help.
Connor.
Thanks, Connor.
It was good seeing you.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Miss Williams. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mr. Williams.
So that's all we have.
It's Thursday Night Live.
Thanks so much for joining, everybody. We have a special session next week where you're going to play a game with some of your teachers, so be sure to join in. Thanks so much for joining us. Have an awesome night. Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Next week's Family Feud. Next week's Family Feud with your teacher. So make sure you sign in. 6:30. We'll send you the Zoom link. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.